I am Nujood, age 10, and divorced. Chapter 2, Khardji. In Khardji, the village where I was born, women are not taught how to make choices. When she was about 16, Shoya, my mother, married my father, Ali Muhammad Al Adhel, without a word of protest. And when he decided 4 years later to enlarge the family by choosing a second wife, my mother obediently accepted his decision. It was with that same resignation that I first agreed to my marriage without realizing what was at stake. At my age, you don't ask yourself many questions. One day, in all innocence, I had asked Mama, a question. How are babies made? You will find out when you are older. She had replied, sweeping away my question with a wave of her hand. I'd simply put my childish curiosity back in the cupboard and gone out to play in the garden with my brothers and sisters. Our favorite game was hide and seek, and in the garden with my brothers and sisters, our favorite game was hide and seek in the valley of Wadila in the northern Yemeni province of Faza offered a wealth of hiding places where we could easily conceal ourselves. Tree trunks, big rocks, caves carved out by time. When we were breathless from too much running around. We'd dive into cool grass to be soothed by our little nest of greenery where the sun caressed our skin and tanned our already dusky cheeks. Rested and refreshed, we would amuse ourselves further by chasing the chickens and teasing the donkeys with sticks. My mother bore 16 children. For her, each pregnancy was a real challenge. She mourned 3 miscarriages in silence. She lost one of her babies at birth. And because there was no doctor, 4 of my brothers and sisters, whom I never knew, died of illness between the ages of 2 months and 4 years. Oma gave birth to me the way she delivered all her children at home, lying on a woman mat, sweating, suffering terribly, and begging God to protect her newborn. Now and then, to satisfy my curiosity, she would speak to me of my arrival. You were a long time coming out. The contractions began in the middle of the night at around 2 in the morning, and the birth lasted a good half day in midsummer in withering heat. It was a Friday on a holiday. But even if I had been born on an ordinary weekday, it wouldn't have made much difference. There was never any question of Oma giving birth in a hospital. Our village was all the way at the end of the valley, far from medical facilities, and Kardji was only 5 little stone houses without any grocery store, garage, barber, city hall, or even a mosque. There was no way to get three except by mule. Go there except by mule. Only a few brave pickup drivers dared take the rocky path along the edge of the ravine, a road so bad they had to change their tires every 2 months. So imagine the scene if my mother had chosen to go to the hospital. She would have given birth right out in the open. Uma says that even the mobile medical clinics never rest trying to reach I lost my page. Trying to reach Kharchi. Whenever she was worn out by my question, forget to tell me end of that story, I would spur Oma on. But then who acted nurse in our house? Well, luckily, your big sister Jamila was there. As always, she was the one who helped me cut the cord with the kitchen knife. Then she gave you your first bath before wrapping you in a cloth. Nujood is a Bedouin name, people say, and it was your grandfather Jed who gave it to you. Uma, was I born in June or July or right in middle of August? This is the point at which Uma usually begin to get testy. Nujood, when you are going to stop pestering me like this? And then puts And that puts end to my questions. Actually, she stops answering me because she doesn't know what to say. Since my name does not appear in any way in the official registers out in the countryside, people have people name does not appear in any way in the official registers. Out in the countryside, people have bushels of babies without bothering with identity cards. As for the years of my birth, who knows? By deductions, my mother said today that I must be around 10, but I could just as well be 8 or 9. Sometimes that I am persistent, Oma understand a careful calculation to try to establish the birth order of her children. For her reference point, cal- she used the seasons, the death of relatives, the marriages of certain cousins, the times we moved house, and so on. It's a real feat of mental aerobatics. And so, after an accounting much more complicated than when she goes to the corner grocery store in Sana, she deduces each time that Jamila, the oldest child, followed by Muhammad, the first boy and the second man of the family, the one who has a power of decision right after my father, next are Mona, the mysterious, and fair, the impetus, and then me, followed by my pet sister, Hafia, who is almost as tall as I am, finally Murad, Abdu, Asil, Khaled, and then the last little girl, Ravda, with the curly hair, as far as Daula, my aunt, and my father's second wife, who is one of the distant cousins. She has 5 children. Oma, as a good laying hen, Mona after often says with a laugh that she feels like a teasing our mother and remember waking up more than once in the morning to find a newborn baby in Oma's bed for her to cluck over. She will never stop. Oma does remember, however, being visited once by a representative of an association called Family Planning. They gave her a prescription for tablets to keep her from getting pregnant, and she took them from time to time. One day, on days when she remembered them. 1 month later, though, to her great surprise, her belly began to swell again, and she decided that such was life. Sometimes you cannot go against nature. Kharji is well named. In Arabic, Kharji means outside. In other words, at the end of the earth. Most geographers don't even take the trouble to put this microscopic place on many maps. Let's just say Kharji is not far from Harja, an important city in the northwestern Yemen, to the north of Sanas. Traveling between this tiny lost locality and the capital requires at least 4 hours on paved roads, and the same again over sand and rubble. When my brother used to set out in the morning for classes, they walked for a good 2 hours to reach the school, which was in a larger village in a valley. School was reserved for them. Since my father, a very protective man, considers girls too fragile and vulnerable to venture out alone on those almost deserted paths where danger lurked behind every cactus. Besides, neither he nor my mother knew how to read or write, so they didn't really see any need for their girls to learn either. Or out in the countryside, most of the women are illiterate. So I grew up in a school of the great outdoors, watching Amma take care of the house and itching for the day I would be old enough to tag along with my 2 big sisters, Jamila and Mona, when they left to fetch water from their spring in little yellow jerry cans. The climate in Yemen is so dry that everyone must drink several liters of water every day to avoid dehydration. As soon as I learned to walk, the river became one of my chief haunts. It flowed past only a few yards below the house and was quite useful to us. Women did our laundry there and rinsed out to cook pots after every meal in its clear waters. And then men left for fields in the morning. The women went to rivers to wash in the shade of the tall trees. On stormy days, we would take refuge at home from the lightning and rain. But as soon as the sun rays broke through the clouds again, we children would dash back to the river, now swollen with water that came up to my neck. To keep its banks from overflowing, my brothers would build little dikes to channel its current. On their way home from school, the boys would gather branches to feed the fire for the tandoor, the traditional cylindrical clay oven in which we cook khobs, our Yemeni bread. The older sisters were experts in the preparation of their crispy flatbreads, which we sometimes drizzle with honey, the gold of Yemen, as the grown up say. The honey of our region is especially famous, and my father had several beehives. He cared for our astonishing tenderness. Oman never tried of telling us that honey was good for health and provided energy. Supper was traditionally eaten around a sofa, a large cloth spread out on the floor, which many Arab Muslims use instead of a table mealtime. As soon as Umma had sat down on a piping hot stew pot full of salt or spicy ragout of beef or mutton in an aromatic fenugreek sauce, we would plunge in our hands to roll up little balls of rice and meat that swiftly vanished down our throats. By imitating our parents, we learned to eat straight from our serving dishes. No places, no forks, no knives. That's how we eat in the villages of Yemen. Now and then, Oma would take us to the market held every Saturday in heart of the valley, and for us, this was a major excursion. We had gotten there on donkeys to stick up on provisions. If the sun beat down too harshly, Oman would wear a straw hat over the black veil there that covered a good part of their face. She looked like a sunflower. We were living rather happily to the rhythm of the sun. It was a simple life but peaceful without electricity or running water. Off behind a bush, the toilet was just a hole within a low brick wall, decorated modestly with a few cushions lying on the floor. The main room of our home turned into a bedroom at night. To go from one room to another, we had to cross a central courtyard, which became our living room in the summer. Adapting itself to all our family's needs, Oma would set up in an outdoor kitchen there, simmering saltas on the wood fire while she nursed the youngest children. My brothers would study the alphabet out in the fresh air. We girls would take nap on the mattress of straw. My father was not often at home. We usually rose at first, like to take his animals out to graze. We had 80 sheep and 4 cows, which gave us enough milk to make butter, yogurt, and soft white cheese. Whenever we went to visit our next door neighbors, he always wore a brown jacket over his jana and a ceremonial dagger called a zambia at his belt. The men of my country all wear the sharp hand-decorated dagger, which is said to be a symbol of authority, manhood, and prestige in Yemeni society. And it's true that it gave our father a certain self-assurance, a noticeable dash of style. I was proud of my Abba, but as I understand it, was these weapons are more than simple decorations, since everyone wants to be one wearing the handsome jambia, and their cost varies depending on whether the handle is made up of plastic, ivory, real rhinoceros horns. According to the codes of our tribal culture, it is forbidden to use the daggers in self-defense to attack adversary during an argument. On the contrary, the jambia may be used to help resolve conflicts and is above all a symbol of tribal justice. My father would never have ever imagined he would ever need this until that unlucky day when we were forced to flee our village within 24 hours. I was between 2 and 3 years old when the scandal broke out. The circumstances were most unusual. Oma was in capital, Sanas for health problems and for reasons surely related to her absence, the details of which were unknown to me. At the time, a violent dispute broke out between my father and other villagers in Kharji. During the arguments, my sister Mona's name kept coming up. It was then decided to resolve the conflict in the tribal manner by placing jambias in bundle of riles notes between the protagonists, but the discussions degenerated, and in an exceptional breach of protocol, blades were drawn. The other villagers accused my family of having trampled the honor of Kharji and stained its reputation. My father was beside himself. He felt swindled, demeaned by those he had thought were his friends. All I knew was that Mona, the second daughter of her family and 13 years old, at most had suddenly gotten married. What exactly had happened, I was too little to understand. One day I would find out. But at that time I knew only that we had to leave right away and leave everything behind. Sheep, cow, chickens, bees, and our memories of what I had bought. I had thought was a small corner of paradise. Our arrival in Sanas was quite a shock. The capital was a blur of dust and noise and hard to get used to. The contrast between the green Wadilas Valley and bareness of sprawling city was brutal. because outside the ancient heart of the city, with its lovely traditional abode houses, their windows outlined in lacy white designs, the urban landscape became a vulgar confusion of dismal concrete buildings. On the street, I was exactly on a level with all exhaust pipes belching diesel fumes which made my throat sore. There were hardly any parks where children could run and play, and you had to buy tickets to most of the amusement parks. Only rich people went there. We moved into the ground floor of a slum building on a garbage strewn area in a neighborhood of Alka. Alka Abba was depressed. He hardly spoke. He had lost all his appetite. How, how could a simple illiterate peasant without a diploma hope to support his family in this capital, already collapsing under its burden of unemployed people? Other villagers had already come to seek their fortune here, only to run into a wall of problems. Some men had been reduced to sending their wives and children to beg for coins in public squares. By knocking on doors, my father finally landed a job as a sweeper for the local sanitation authority at a salary that barely paid our rent. And whenever we were late with that, our landlord would shout angrily at us. Oma would weep, and no one could sweeten her sadness. When he was 12 years old, Fairs, the four children in the family, began to want the things all boys long for at his age. Every day he demanded money to go buy himself candy, stylish trousers, and new shoes, like the ones he saw in billboards advertisements. Beautiful brand new shoes that would have cost our father more than a month's salary. Jolly and rambunctious by nature, Fairs kept demanding more and more, and even began to threaten my parents, telling them he would run away if they didn't manage to satisfy his cravings. He was a show off, true about his still my favorite brother. At least he didn't hit me like Muhammad, my eldest brother, who acted like the head of the family. I admire Fairs for his ambition, his energy, his way of standing up to everyone without worrying about their reactions. He made choices and stuck to them, even if he had to take on the entire family. One day, after an argument with our father, he left the house and did not come back. For the first time in my life, I saw Abba cry. To drown his sorrow, he began going off for long hours to chew cat with some old acquaintances and wound up losing his job. Oma started having bad dreams, and in his main room, where we children slept by her side on little mattresses laid on the floor, I was awakened several times in the middle of night by her sobbing. She was suffering, and it showed. Fairs had gone without leaving a trace except for one tiny and identity photo in color, with Muhammad kept carefully in the deepest part of his wallet. No doubt about it, it was Fairs in the snapshot with the held high, white turban, planted wings, curly brown hair. No, make him look grown up, no doubt. He stared right at the camera with a naughty, twinkling eye. And then, 2 years after his flight, we received an unexpected phone call. The first sign of life, Saudi Arabia. We heard at the other end of the line, "Everything is fine, Shepherd. I'm working as a shepherd. Don't worry about me." His voice has changed. He sounded more confident, but I recognized him right away. But the line, crackling with static, quirky, went dead. How had Fairs moved up so far away? What city was he actually in? Had he been lucky enough to take a plane flying up into the clouds? And exactly where was Saudi Arabia, anyways? Was there any seashore where he was? I had so many questions. I overheard Abba, Abu, Oma, and Muhammad speculating that Fairs had been an object of child trafficking, which is supposedly rather frequent in Yemen. Did that mean he had found some of adopted parents? Perhaps he was happy after all and could finally buy himself the candy and blue jeans he wanted so much. As for me, I missed him terribly. To help me forget his loss, I withdrew into my dreams, dreams of water, not of rivers, but the ocean. I have always wanted to be like a sea turtle so that I could stick my head underwater. I have never seen the sea. With my colored pencils, I would draw waves in my little notebook. I have imagined they were green or blue. They are blue. My girlfriend Malik informed me one day, looking over my shoulder. Malik and I had become inseparable. I had met her in Alka neighborhood school where my parents had finally agreed to register me. During recess, we often play marbles. Out of 70 people, all girls, crammed into the classroom, she was my best friend. I had done very well there my first year and had just begun my second. Malik would stop in the morning to get me and would go off to school together. Blue, how would you know? I asked her. For vacation, my parents take me to Aladhayak. It's by Red Sea. What does the water taste like? It's salty. And the sand? It's blue too? No, it's yellow and it's so soft. If you only knew. And what's in the sea? Boats, fish, and people swimming. Malak told that she would learn to swim there. I had never even dipped my toe, and it's a kiddie pool. So I was fascinated. No matter how hard I tried to understand how she managed to stay on the surface of water, I could never figure out that mystery. All I remembered is that in Kharji, Oma would always shout a warning at me when I went too near the river. Watch out, if you fall, you will sink. Malak said that her mother had bought her a bathing suit in pretty colors, and that she herself could even build sand castles with turrets and grand staircases that then melted away into the waves. One day she held a big shell she had brought back from Haldai ship up against my ear. Listen, and you will hear the sea, the waves. Oh, I hear the waves, I yelled. It's unbelievable. To me, water was above all rain, which is becoming very scarce in Yemen. Sometimes we would be startled by hail in the middle of summertime. What happiness! Sometimes we would be startled by hail in the middle of summertime. We children would dash into street to collect the little hailstone in basins. I would count them proudly because at school I had learned to count from 1 to 100. When the ice melted, we had fun sprinkling the cold water onto our faces to cool off. Mona had been fairly glum since coming to live with us in Sanas 2 months after our hasty departure from Kharji, but even she would sometimes join us in our revelry after those extraordinary hailstorms. Mona had arrived with the husband who had so suddenly imposed himself on her life, and as the years went by, she gradually recovered her natural smile, her mocking air, and the sense of humor that so often exasperated Oma brought 2 pretty babies into the world, Monira and Nasir, who filled her with joy. Our family and her husband wound up growing closer, and to reinforce this union, they talked about marrying my big brother Muhammad to one of her brother-in-law's sister, following the tradition of cigar. But it was too good to last. One day, Mona's husband vanished from scene, and so did my big sister Jamila. Had they, like fairs, run away in the hope of making their fortune in Saudi Arabia and perhaps bringing us back some electronic toys or a color television? In my parents' room, there was much whispering about the two of them. But we children were strictly forbidden to ask any question. I remember only that right after their mysterious disappearance, which I would come to understand only much later. Mona became capricious and moody again. Most of the time, she was melancholy and depressed, and then all of a sudden she would burst into laughter that would revive her natural beauty, enhancing her big brown eyes and delicate features. Mona really possessed lots of charm. Whether she was having a good day or bad one, though, Mona was always particularly sweet to me, even protective sort of maternal instinct. Sometimes she would take me with her to window shop on Hyel Avenue, famous for clothing stores. Gazing enviously at the window displays, I admired the sequin evening gowns, the red skirts, the silk blouses in blue, violet, yellow, and green. I imagined I was changed into a princess. There were even wedding dresses which looked like movie costumes or magical fairy tale gowns, so beautiful, the stuff of dreams. On one February evening in 2008, when I had gotten home, Abba told me he had some good news. Nujood, you are about to be married.